Good morning, everyone. I'd be in my salutation on the YouTube chat. And let's see here. Hoot. Anyway, today we're going to discuss the opening of the egg. This is when Jung was apprehensive about what would happen in his psyche. Good morning, Art. Nice to see you. See, I'm trying to get my screen set up a little bit so that I can see what's going on. And okay. All right. So we're reading from the Red Book by C.G. Jung, Reader's Edition. And we're on page 306 of the Red Book. And you recall that the last 2 weeks we were discussing Izdubar, and Izdubar was a manifestation of God in Dr. Jung's psyche. Good morning, Jordan. Nice to see you here.
You too. Good morning.
Good to have you. You're up bright and early. Is it really hot in Taos?
80s.
80s? Sounds good.
Like Mountain Maui.
I read in our newspaper this morning that St. John's College, which is the third oldest college in the United States and is headquartered here in Annapolis, the other educational institution besides the Naval Academy, also has a outlier campus in Santa Fe.
Yeah, they do.
That's interesting.
Big thing. Yeah.
Yeah, I like their approach to study, which is the great books. And I don't know if you know anything about that, but it's a liberal arts school, and liberal doesn't mean anything politically necessarily, but what it does do is it has you experience all kinds of different works, but in the original. So if you study physics at St. John's, you study Isaac Newton in the original, based on the great books. And the idea is to get your psyche to be developing as, modern thinkers developed, I guess. So Dr. Jung would approve. I don't know that Dr. Jung ever knew anything about it, but it's a good thing. Good morning, Michelle. Nice to see you. Dionysus, Kathy, great to have you here. I'm going to put onto the chat right now the link for the Confluence 23. And the reason is that we now have it set up properly, I believe, knock on wood. And so it's time to register if you're going to go. Good morning, Judith. Nice to see you today. And I actually, just for Judith's information, I put in, I took a picture of my latest Rocky, which I may show at the end of the session just for fun. But I'm not going to do that now. Now we're going to do opening the egg. And thank you, Blank Vision, for that kind contribution. I appreciate it very much. So I want to go back one paragraph. and I want to go back 2 paragraphs. I want to go back to the paragraph that Dr. Jung had written in large script in the Red Book, and it is it's a prayer to Izdubar, remembering that Izdubar is in an egg. Izdubar came to Jung in his imagination, and Jung told him some facts of Western science, which lamed him. And so he got sick, and Jung decided that he would take him home and try to heal him. So he, in his imagination, shrank him down to the size of the contents of an egg, and then put him in his pocket. Now he's at home, and he's about to open the egg, and he says this prayer. My God, I love you as a mother loves the unborn, where she carries in her heart. Grow in the egg of the East, nourish yourself from my love, drink the juice of my life, so that you will become a radiant God. We need your light, O child, since we go in darkness, light up our paths. May your light shine before us. May your fire warm the coldness of your life. Of our life. May the fire warm the coldness of our life. We do not need your power, but life. And then there's the following paragraph in prose. What does power avail us? We do not want to rule. We want to live. We want light and warmth, and hence we need yours. Just as the greening earth and every living body needs the sun, so we as spirits need your light and your warmth. A sunless spirit becomes the parasite of the body, but the God feeds the spirit. And so then we get, and I'm going to just show one of the images from the Red Book. This is God feeding the spirit. And let's see. What's going on? Oh, there it is. It's hidden behind my camera. Okay, so this is right before the opening of the egg. And here, Jung is kind of exhibiting on the tree of life that God gives us everything that avails us. And when he says avails us, he means everything that God makes available to us. And so here is his image of the tree of life. And then he opens the egg. And so in this image here, you can see the egg at the bottom of the picture is white. Those two little white things are actually the cracked eggshell. And out of this cracked eggshell comes this fire. And Jung, the eye, which represents Jung in his active imagination, is bent over in supplication to this God. And so here's what it says. On the evening of the third day, I kneel down on the rug and carefully open the egg. Something resembling smoke rises up from it, and suddenly Izdubar is standing before me, enormous, transformed and complete. His limbs are whole, and I find no trace of damage on them. It's as if he had awoken from a deep sleep. He says, "Where am I? How narrow it is here. How dark, how cool. Am I in the grave? Where was I? It seemed to me as if I had been outside in the universe. Over and under me was an endlessly dark, star glittering sky, and I was in a passion of unspeakable yearning. Streams of fire broke from my radiating body. I surged through blazing flames. I swam in a sea that wrapped me in living fires, full of light, full of longing, full of eternity. I was ancient and perpetually renewing myself, falling from the heights to the depths, and whirled, glowing from the depths to the heights, hovering around myself amidst glowing clouds, as raining embers beating down like the foam of the surf, engulfing myself in stifling heat, embracing and rejecting myself in a boundless game. Where was I? I was completely sun. And so here you see as Iztabar is emerging, that's what Jung's image here represents. And I'm just going to leave the rest for the moment. And so, Jordan, do you want to comment on this so far?
Yeah, I love that. And beyond even just healed, he is the sun. He is the life giver. He is the generator. And in that sense, that in the egg, the longing for the life finds a way and to come out of the egg. So in that sense, that longing is nothing about the caterpillar's life tells it anything about the butterfly, but that's, he's crawled up the twig, spun the chrysalis, and here he comes back renewed.
Okay, well, let's talk about that, your metaphor, for a moment, because what Jung is talking about here is nothing less than what happens in all of us. Okay, in other words, we all have come out of darkness, and all of a sudden there's a world, and at the beginning, we're little kings and queens, and so what Jung is experiencing here is also what a child would experience as it has realization of God, let's say, because a child doesn't know anything about God until their parents tell them something about it. Do you want to comment on that?
Yeah, I think it's important that, instead of, first there was the light, it's like, no, first there was the dark and the soul. And in that sense, you emerge from the depths of, mom, from womb. And I think that is important, because instead of the light being the goal, it's the light and the dark together. Right. So that you have the potential in gestation and then the actual after the birth. And I think those two together then create that one as sun, S-U-N. And then as you live, your sun tempers and brightens and darkens and spots and moves in such a way that you become more naturally both.
Yeah.
From starting in the dark and starting in the unconscious and starting in the soul, so that then the spirit can nestle in the soul.
Right. And Dionysus says the tree reminds me of the Sephiroth, I think it also reminds of the Kabbalah.
The Sephiroth and the tree of life.
Right.
It was interesting that there were 6 across the top horizontally and then 3 either side. So a total of 12, which is really indicative of the son of the empress, the hanged man in numerology from that and tarot. But the Sephiroth then are also those eggs on the tree, the fruit, so to speak, on the tree of the Kabbalah. And these paths, between them, in this case, the trunk to the tree, the branches to each one, instead of being interconnected, the tree is the interconnection, and they each reside and form on the edge and on the top.
Right. And I definitely want to keep in mind here that we're still in a period from December 25th, from Christmas Day 2013 to or 1913, not 2013, until now, January 10th. So this opening of the egg is a continuation of Dr. Jung's visioning process, and it still is just over 2 weeks old. And it, so everything that we've read in the Red Book up to this point, all the active imaginations came during this period. Now, some of the later ones came a year or two later. He did have visions for about 5 years, but we're now approximately, I would say, just over 50% of the book. And a lot of things happen in this very short period of time. So you can imagine what it must have been like for Dr. Jung to have all these visions all on one go. And even when I had my visioning period, which I was totally unprepared for, it took 8 months for me to go through my whole process, which I put down in the form of a novel. But I don't know what I would have done if I'd had something as intense as this happening to me at that time.
Well, in a sense, I think this was as intense for you, and that I think we each experience this, and we each experience it differently. And since it was all consuming, I mean, it ruled your life, even outside the bounds of your discretion, your acceptable risk.
Right.
You wanted to hide it because, my business colleagues can't see this. I mean,
yeah,
they'll cart me away, or worse, they'll fire you kind of. And then it's interesting to me that coming to that kind of outside your comfort zone, which is actually in the birth zone within, is interesting, because there's I think a metaphor or a lesson of how comfortable are you with your own intensities. And at that point, you are, in a sense, teaching yourself about the living God, much as parents taught you about divinity when you were a child. Yeah. And I think that's important, because then it's not the child becoming the parent of the adult. That's you, the adult, starting to birth the rest of your life. And
right. And it took me 25 years to get through that birthing the rest of my life, because in my own experience, I put the whole thing in a drawer for 16 years, from 1993 to 2009. And then when I saw the Red Book for the first time, I said, oh my God, here are the greatest psychiatrists, psychologists of the 20th century had an experience similar to mine. And it still took me a good long time, from 2009 until probably 2016, before I really started to understand it completely. But Jordan, would you read the Would you read the footnotes 135 and 136?
Sure.
These are footnotes that are at the beginning of this chapter and then right at the end of the reading that I just read.
Footnote 135, January 10th, 1914. In Black Book 3, Jung wrote, in quotes, "It appears as if something has been achieved through this memorable event, but it is incalculable where this will all lead. I'll hardly say that Izdubar's fate is grotesque and magic, or grotesque and tragic, for that is what our most precious life is." From the Vischer's book, that is the first attempt to elevate, let me get this a little larger, first attempt to elevate this truth to a system. He rightly deserves a place among the immortal. What lies in the middle is the truth. It has many faces. One is certainly comical, another sad, a third evil, a fourth tragic, a fifth funny, a sixth is a grimace, and so forth. Should one of these faces become particularly obtrusive, we thus recognize that we have deviated from a certain truth and approach an extreme that constitutes a definite impasse should we decide to pursue this route. It is a murderous task to write the wisdom of real life, particularly if one has committed many years to serious scientific research. What proves to be most difficult is to grasp the playfulness of life, the childish, so to speak, and I would add childlike, all the manifold sides of life, the great, the beautiful, the serious, the black, the devilish, the good, the ridiculous, that are grotesque, are fields of application which each tend to wholly absorb the beholder or describer. Our time requires something capable of regulating the mind. Just as the concrete world has expanded from the limitedness of the ancient outlook to the immeasurable diversity of our modern outlook, the world of intellectual possibilities has developed to unfathomable diversity. Infinitely long paths, paved with thousands of thick volumes, lead from one specialization to another. Soon, no one will be able to walk down these paths anymore. And then only specialists will remain. More than ever, we require the living truth of the life of the mind, of something capable of providing firm guidance. From pages 74 to 77. Vischer's work was Allgemeine Reisebahnschaft from Stuttgart, 1884. In 1921, Jung wrote, Vischer's novel, Allgemeine, gives a deep insight into this side of the introverted state of the soul, and also the underlying symbolism of the collective unconscious. From Psychological Types, Collected Works, Volume 6, paragraph 627. In 1932, Jung commented on the introverted state of the soul. Nope, I missed the line. In 1932, Jung commented on Vischer in the Psychology of Kundalini Yoga on page 54. On Allgemeine, see Ruth Heller. Allgemeine, the epitome of Frau Theodor Vischer's, or Frau T.H. Vischer's philosophy of life. German Life and Letters 8. And paragraph 136. Rusher notes that as a god, Izdubar is associated with the sun god. The incubation and the rebirth of Izdubar follows the classic pattern of solar myths. In Das Zeitalter des Sonnengottes, Leo Frobenius pointed out the widespread motif of a woman becoming pregnant through a process of immaculate conception and giving birth to the sun god. who develops in a remarkably short period of time. In some form, he incubates in an egg. Frobenius related this to the setting and rising of the sun in the sea. Jung cited this work on a number of occasions in Transformations and Symbols of the Libido from 1912.
Right. And I think it's Father Theodore Vischer. The F, I think, must mean.
I think you're right. I think, yeah,
yeah, Father Theodore
I think you're right.
Vischer. And so Jung is noting how powerful these experiences are that he is having. And, he really doesn't know what to do with them at this point, obviously, or yet, but he knows he has to write them down and keep track of them. And that's if you want to have the epitome of a scholar, you have to look at Carl Jung's work in Collected Works, and you go, "Oh my God, how could I ever do something like that?" Yeah, and I even went to schools where they taught how to do that, and I go, "Oh my God, this is scholarly beyond scholarly."
Well, and I think it's important. It is, and at the same time, it's important, I think, to note, for example, your process of that novel. 8 months long is a premature pregnant birth. It's, in a sense, a preemie. It's a short pregnancy. So I find it interesting. I know with my watercolors and oils at that same time in the early 90s, it was 10 months on, and then almost to the day, close the spigot, 10 months off. Yeah. And so there was pouring out, and then there was the refilling. And it's interesting because the gestation period of what I jokingly called my man womb was just like, in that sense, the timing of having a baby. Yeah. And I think that birth and death and resurrection, as it would be to refill, is important to note. That I think, as Colleen says, there's no rootless flower. So to have that birth, you have to go through the process of that gestation of everything that brings that flower into being.
Right. And so what we're talking about is what really happens to all of us, and in good ways and bad ways. And what Jung is pointing out here, I don't know if we've gotten to it yet, but he's pointed out, well, he did point it out in this footnote, where he's talking about the hallways of, volumes of books, and nobody can ever get down these hallways anymore. The point is that those are all dead ends, and it's only when we can rise above those hallways and above all that literature. I mean, it's tremendous scholarly literature going back thousands of years, obviously. Monks in medieval monasteries devoted their whole lives to writing things down and repeating them, because they didn't have printing presses at that time. Mm-hmm. And so it took humanity, thousands of years to even build up those libraries. And it seems to me that what we have in Jung is a roadmap which goes up. Okay, in other words, we have to be up above those libraries and hallways of scholarly work, or we just get bogged down. And most people in academia just get bogged down. They get comfortable, they get their tenure, and they get comfortable teaching what they can understand, and they don't think beyond it. And the task,
well, that's the specialist. I think you're talking about them. They become specialists, which to me is too high in the tree. They get altitude sickness because they don't have the roots to fly that high, and so in a sense they become consciously knocked out. I mean, it's you're literally unconscious on your feet. So
Yeah.
the whole in boxing, knocked out on your feet. It's they stumble around, but then it's all head words, too intellecty as it would be.
Yeah. Yeah. And so Richard Casper makes a comment here. He's one of our devoted followers, and he says, if it's true and I believe it to be, God messes with our heads by allowing us to believe the serpent energy concept. He is sovereign, he is God, and teaches us hard lessons in personal ways. Well, Richard, you are still personifying God, and God is beyond personification and beyond gender. And Jung is realizing that in this image that we've been talking about, where the egg is opened, and it's the image is a metaphor, but I'm going to share it once again, because yes, God that we're taught in Christianity is a personified God, but here Jung is pointing out that God is way beyond that, and that he can only say so in images, seems to me. Jordan, you want to comment?
Yeah, the serpent indication, the serpent metaphor is really important there, because the serpent is one of the few animals that can easily go between both worlds. It can go into the dark cave inside the earth. It can come onto the ground, into the light, and it can also climb or slither, grasp. There aren't legs, but climb's probably the wrong word, but move up the tree. So the serpent's a wonderful both and metaphor. The crab is the same way. It goes into and out of the ocean, breathing in water, breathing in air, without shifting, without effort, without anything changed except its environment. So the ability to move from a human standpoint, a person standpoint, within, into, into the outside and above, to move above and below, both, is important. And not to, oh, I'm in the spirit, oh, I'm in the soul. It's both. Just whatever's presenting the face at any given time becomes the important. So I think the serpent is interesting because it easily travels between the worlds.
Right. I think it's interesting. Michelle's got a good comment here. She says, I take refuge in the Buddha, I take refuge in the Dharma, I take refuge in the Sangha. She's referring to Buddhism and to the practice of taking refuge. And as we're speaking here, in my next room, my wife is in a teaching with a Buddhist Lama. And that teaching, there's access to that teaching from mainland China, believe it or not. And the teaching started at 10 a.m., the same time we started. But by 9:30, there were also already 950 people logged on to that teaching. And the maximum is 1,000. And before the beginning of her teaching, which was at 10, at maybe 9:50, it already had a full group. And she said, their bosses in China just have no idea, right, what's going on here. So here's a Tibetan Buddhist Lama by birth, who now has a teaching center in Akron, Ohio, and who has a global following, where he's teaching to 1,000 people on a Sunday, and it's just amazing what's going on, and it's happening so fast. And, even we know even that in the old Soviet Union, people were keeping the embers of their traditional paths alive as well. And the Soviets destroyed a lot of the cathedrals and so on that were in Tsarist Russia. And as soon as the Soviet Union collapsed in 1989, within 3 years, all these cathedrals were rebuilt. And that's the amazing thing, that it had been repressed for that long, 70 years, and the people went right back to it. Okay, now, what the point that I wanted to make about what Michelle said is that it is really powerful, and we do have to take refuge, and we do have to not let ourselves get carried away with it. Okay, in other words, there used to be people in the asylums who would say they were Jesus Christ and that sort of thing, and they were the manifestation of Jesus Christ, whatever it was. And there's still people in India that go around basically naked because that's what they feel they have to do in their path. And Jung's point is that we have to be above this path, all these paths, and we have to understand that they're all very useful, and they've all held human psyches together for thousands of years and developed in thousands of ways. I have a great quote that is in volume 10 of the collected works, so I think I better find that and show you.
While you're finding that, I really resonate with Michelle's verb to take, or infinitive to take refuge.
Yes.
Because especially that verb, there's a surrender of the identity to a natural place that vessels you. And so in a sense, you let out and let go to become more connected to nature by the refuge. And so refuge is not weakness. It's not just protection. Right. It's a literal vessel. So refuge, like the hermit, refuge in the cave, what happens is then the cave becomes a larger identity formed by nature, a boundary, an identity. And that refuge, then you don't lose self, but you connect more fully. And in also refuge, there's rest and reflection.
Right. And like all 12-step programs also, which had their origin in Jung, the point is to recognize that there is such a thing as a religious experience or a numinous experience, and then to take refuge with the other members who've been through it and who can help you deal with what you're going through and what you're taking refuge in alcohol or whatever, and you need somebody who's going to guide you through, so that
torches along the path.
Yeah, so you don't kill yourself, and so that's what happens, I think, in 12-step programs. Mind you, I've never been to an actual meeting of a 12-step program of any kind, so I'm only getting this secondhand, but I know that it works, and I know the basic outline of it. Just instance, all over the Soviet Union, they had churches, monasteries hidden deep in caves in the mountains and other difficult to access places. I've visited a few of them in the Balkans.
There's the refuge too. That important
that's the
thing
taking
that was
refuge.
built in
Yeah,
refuge.
right. And so anyway, so let's go on. And so now, so Izdubar has now come out in this ball of flame. And I just wanted to mention one other thing. You were talking about snakes, and there is an interesting image about snakes that comes up here, but I'm going to save that for a while later.
And did you find that quote from volume 10? You wanted to?
Oh, I beg your pardon. Yes, I did want to show that.
I think I know which one you're talking about, and that's pretty poignant.
Yeah, this is the quote, and it's paragraph 367 of volume 10. I made a couple of small changes. One, the title is mine. Theologians and psychologists are in the same business, and the part in red I've emphasized, and I added the two words that are in square brackets, naturally evolved. So here's what he says. For thousands of years, the mind of man was worried about the sick soul, perhaps even earlier than it did about the sick body. The propitiation of gods, the perils of the soul, and its salvation, these are not yesterday's problems. Religions are naturally evolved psychotherapeutic systems in the truest sense of the word and on the grandest scale. They express the whole range of the psychic problem in mighty images. They are the avowal and recognition of the soul, and at the same time, the revelation of the soul's nature. So that's, a really, that's one of the most important paragraphs I've ever read in the collected works, that paragraph, because it really tells us what it's about. Okay. And it's like, what's it all about, Alfie? From the movie Alfie. We all go through this. So we all go through it in our own development. And I'm going to take it off the screen because you can go back and look at the video later and see it.
And I think that quote's important too you froze. There you go. I think that quote's really important because there's a currency of value in just the process. So for example, Michelle taking refuge and Dharma, etc. There's a process there. And what happens, you're living a path into being, and refuge is then a place in the path, along the path, and that process, whether it be religion, numinous experience, coming to light, the process is important instead of hiding under a big leaf and holding your breath.
Right. Little Giuseppe here says, sometimes when I feel the subtle body, I start crying. I was wondering if that has anything to do with Kundalini and the cleansing of the chakras. And I would simply say, sure, it has lots to do with the Kundalini, and we could talk about it in the context of many other religions.
Well, and also I think too, it's like when with that, they're not tears of joy or tears of sadness, they're tears of life welling up, which then I refer to as sacred adornments. You're literally spilling some beauty. Your life is welling up to pour. And I think that's important. And for example, when you get moved, and your eyes wet or even, flow over, and you being editorial, any of us, there's that being moved. And I think the important about that being moved is that's life coming back to us. to flow over.
Yeah.
So we get more.
Okay, and Richard says Jung holds water because I am undergoing identical issues that he went through. I don't find any answers in him, though, but it's interesting to me.
Well, that's the difference between Jung and Freud.
Right, Dionysus says, so it's subjective then. Well, everything we talk about here is subjective.
Well, that's subjective. I think it doesn't need to be formed. That's the difference between Freud and Jung. Freud wanted to explain everything. Jung wanted to teach you how to live.
Yeah.
And the not moving between, Freud between right and wrong. Jung is between sense and nonsense. And what happens there, nonsense is not bad. What it is it's a state of a lack of sense. And so what's interesting about that is it's important because then you're not playing the I have to solve this. I have to intellectually do a geometric proof to explain this. It's like an intuition. Reasons are always unreasonable, except you still have the intuition because it's a gut, a deep knowing. And for example, the difference between intuition and wishful thinking, wishful thinking, when I win the Powerball and buy those islands, well, there's no tension. There's no life in that statement. It's just a wishy-washy, literally. Whereas if I have an intuition, I feel it in my gut. And that gut is beauty moving purely.
Right. And the Chinese worked this out with the yin yang symbol 5,000 years ago or more. And the Hindus did it with the Bhagavad Gita 5,000 years ago. They repeated it down through the centuries until about 2,000 years ago, they actually wrote it down. But until 2,500 years ago, the Bhagavad Gita hadn't been written down. It had just been recited by priests because they knew it was important. And and the Buddha went through all kinds of things. He searched, he tried to understand all sorts of things. He began his work by seeing death and seeing an old man, which he had never seen before. And he went out and searched, and at one point, he saw the Indian sadhus that you can still see running around with they're just barely wearing a loincloth, and they hardly eat anything. And so he tried that, and there's a very famous jade sculpture in the Lahore Museum in Pakistan. I've actually physically seen it, where the Buddha is basically just a skeleton because he tried that path for 5 years and nearly died from it. And it was very shortly after that he had his enlightenment, that he reached his enlightenment, that it is the middle path that is the way to go.
And you bring up the yin yang, and back to Michelle's, I'm really fascinated with the verb, the infinitive to refuge, to take refuge.
Yes.
In the yin yang, if I go so far into the dark, I find the refuge of the cave of the light dot. If I go so far into the light, I find the refuge of the cave of the black dot. Also, if I walk the serpentine path in the middle, I have refuge from either side and both. If I take the connection to all, I have refuge from the parts. And then if I'm in the dark, I have refuge from the light. If I'm in the light, I have refuge from the dark. And to me, these are all heartbeats along the path, where, like going through a tight European street, little cobbles, no cars, a couple bicycles maybe get through. Then it opens up onto this huge plaza open to the sky. And then it closes back down. So these heartbeats pulsing along the path of a tight city street opening to the plaza, tight city street open to the plaza. the dark to the light to the dark. They're all points of ongoing refuge. And sometimes the refuge is a refuge from rest, where you're running, you're moving fast, and I think there's the expansion and contraction that comes in that refuge also.
Right.
It's a very powerful verb.
Yeah, I want to reread this first footnote that you read, not the whole thing, but I just want to read what Jung is saying about this so that you get the gist of it, because this is a very important couple of sentences. He says, our time requires something capable of regulating the mind, just as the concrete world has expanded from the limitless to the ancient outlook to the immeasurable diversity, the limitedness of the ancient outlook to the immeasurable diversity of our modern outlook. The world of intellectual possibilities has developed to unfathomable diversity. Infinitely long paths paved with thousands of thick volumes lead from one specialization to another. Soon no one will be able to walk down these paths anymore, and then only specialists will remain. More than ever, we require the living truth of the life of the mind, of something capable of providing firm guidance. And that's what I think Jungian psychology does in the end. I mean, that's his footnote that he wrote in January of 1914. And we need something that can regulate the 21st century and forward mind of humanity. And it isn't all the religions, because we've come to the end of their purview.
Well, and also Jung talks about, it all becomes specialists. And what happens is that's basically documenting the rabbit hole and making nothing mystery, nothing curiosity, nothing driven by wonderment. And it's once you have mastery of one thing, other things come more easily, because then you sit back not trying to play show pony and prove things. You can sit back and simply observe a situation, and the component parts, you look in, well, wait, why are you doing that? That looks redundant. And they look up and that's how we've always done it. And, the beautiful story to me of that's how we've always done it, it's not always correct, is, the guy who says, hey, grandma, I want to do the roast this year. I want to see if I've learned. Well, she goes, I haven't done that in years. Oh, I remember what you did. So that he goes in, the first thing he does is he cuts both ends off the roast and he marinates it, and he does this, puts it in the oven. He cooks it to perfection. He brings it out. She tastes it. She said, oh, it's amazing, but where are the ends? Why did you waste? He goes, oh, I did it like you. You always cut off the ends. That's part of the process. And you put it in. She goes, oh, honey, come on. I cut off the ends because our ovens back then were too small to fit it. That's how we've always done it is usually a misnomer for, I haven't really looked into the process I'm actually utilizing.
Right. Really good. Sorry, I have this cough that I think what happened was in February, I did get a virus from my students, and the virus went away and resolved itself, but it aggravated a little bit of asthma that I had since childhood. So I do have a scheduled appointment with the doctor to talk about it in July, at the end of July. But anyway, so I apologize for my coughing. But anyway, I want to read on. And
well, here's that's a beautiful misnomer. Exactly. The serendipity asthma is it's not a weakness, because what it is, it's an overactive immune system.
Yeah.
And so it's actually imbalance too far into the direction of strength, your body trying to fight something off. So it's not, then maybe, someone with asthma can't go run a marathon. But what it is there's a hyperactive and overly strong imbalance one way, rather than creating a weakness. And again, the roast with the ends cut off, it may appear as a weakness, but the reality is it's something else entirely.
Yep, and that would be exactly right, because my immune system is definitely hyperactive in the sense that I'm allergic to everything that screams and grows. And when I went to the allergist, they did all these skin tests, 48 skin tests, and I'm one of 3 patients that was allergic to everything they tested, everything. And things that they don't test, like beef, lamb, and pork, I'm now allergic to too, only because I got bitten by a Lone Star tick in 2013. So I have a lot of a lot of activity in my body like that. So that's a very interesting fact you just gave me. But hopefully he'll help me calm it down at least.
And the calming down comes to a balanced strength, rather than your body just going, raw, I gotta.
Yeah. Right. So anyway, we're going to go back down into Jung's active imagination now, and so when I say I, this is Jung's imagination of himself within the active imagination.
So the imaginal I.
The imaginal I. So it's him talking to Izdubar. I, O Izdubar, divine one, how wonderful. You are healed. Healed? Was I ever sick? Who speaks of sickness? I was sun, completely sun. I am the sun. An inexpressible light breaks from his body, a light that my eyes cannot grasp. I must cover my face and cast my gaze to the ground. I, are you the sun, the eternal light, most powerful one? Who forgive me for carrying you. Everything is quiet and dark. I look around me. The empty eggshell is lying on the rug. I feel myself, the floor, the walls, everything is as usual, utterly plain and utterly real. I would like to say that everything around me has turned to gold, but it is not true. Everything is as it always has been. Here reigned eternal light, immeasurable and overpowering. It happened that I opened the egg and that the god left the egg. So this is now a text, not part of the active imagination. It happened that I opened the egg and that the god left the egg. He was healed and his figure shone transformed, and I knelt like a child and could not grasp the miracle. He who had been pressed into the core of the beginning rose up, and no trace of illness could be found on him. And when I thought that I had caught the mighty one and held him in my cupped hands, he was the sun itself. I wandered toward the east where the sun rises. I probably wanted to rise too, as if I were the sun. I wanted to embrace the sun and rise with it into daybreak. But it came toward me and stood in my way. It's told me that I had no chance of reaching the beginning, but I lamed the one who wanted to rush down in order to set with the sun in the womb of the night. He was deprived of all hope of reaching the blessed western lands. But behold, I caught the sun without realizing it and carried it in my hand. He who wanted to go down with the sun found me through his downgoing. I became his nocturnal mother, who incubated the egg of the beginning, and he rose up, renewed, reborn to greater splendor. While he rises, however, I go down. When I conquered the God, his force streamed into me. But when the God rested in the egg and awaited his beginning, my force went into him. And when he rose up radiantly, I lay on my face. He took my life with him. All my force was now in him. My soul swam like a fish in his sea of fire, but I lay in the frightful cool of the shadows of the earth and sank down deeper and deeper to the lowest darkness. All light had left me. The God rose in the eastern lands, and I fell into the horror of the underworld. I lay there like a childbearer, cruelly mauled and bleeding her life into the child, uniting life and death in a dying glance. The day's mother, the night's prey. My God had torn me apart terribly. He had drunk the juice of my life. He had drunk my highest power into him and became marvelous and strong like the sun, an unblemished God who bore no stigma or flaw. He had taken my wings from me. He had robbed me of the swelling force of my muscles, and the power of my will disappeared with him. He left me powerless and groaning. I did not know what was happening to me, since simply everything powerful, beautiful, blissful, and superhuman had leaked from my maternal womb. None of the radiant gold remained. Cruelly and unthinkably, the sunbird spread its wings and grew up into infinite space. I was left with the broken shells and the miserable casting of his beginning. The emptiness of the depths opened beneath me. Woe betide the mother who gives birth to a God. If she gives birth to a wounded and pain-stricken God, a sword will pierce her soul. But if she gives birth to an unblemished God, then hell will open to her, from which monstrous serpents will rise convulsively to suffocate the mother with miasma. Birth is difficult, but 1,000 times more difficult is the hellish afterbirth. And just by the way, the next chapter is about hell. So all the dragons and monstrous serpents of eternal emptiness follow behind the divine Son. What remains of human nature when the God has become mature and has seized all power? Everything incompetent, everything powerless, everything eternally vulgar, everything adverse and unfavorable, everything reluctant, diminishing, exterminating, everything absurd, everything that the unfathomable night of matter encloses in itself. That is the afterbirth of the God and his hellish and dreadfully deformed brother. The God suffers when man does not accept his darkness. Consequently, men must have a suffering God, so long as they suffer from evil. To suffer from evil means you still love evil and yet love it no longer. You still hope to gain something, but you do not want to look closely for fear that you might discover that you still love evil. The God suffers because you continue to suffer from loving evil. You do not suffer from evil because you recognize it, but because it affords you secret pleasure and because you believe it promises the pleasure of an unknown opportunity. So long as the God suffers, you have sympathy with him and with yourself. You thus spare your hell and prolong his suffering. If you want to make him well without engaging in secret sympathy with yourself, evil puts a spoke in your wheel, and evil whose form you generally recognize, but whose hellish strength in yourself you do not know. Your unknowing stems from the previous harmlessness of your life, from the peaceful passage of time, and from the absence of the God. But if the God draws near, your essence starts to seethe with the black mud of the depths. Your essence starts to seethe, and the black mud of the depths whirls up. Man stands between emptiness and fullness. If his strength combines with fullness, it becomes fully formative. There is always something good about such formation. If his strength combines with emptiness, it has a dissolving and a destructive effect, since emptiness can never be formed, but only strives to satisfy itself at the cost of fullness. Combined thus, human force turns emptiness into evil. If your force shapes fullness, it does so because of its association with fullness. But to ensure that your formation continues to exist, it must remain tied to your strength. Through constant shaping, you gradually lose your force, since ultimately all force is associated with the shapeliness that has been given form. Ultimately, where you mistakenly imagine you are rich, you have actually become poor, and you stand amidst your forms like a beggar. That is when the blinded man is seized by an increasing desire to give shape to things, since he believes that manifold increased formation will satisfy his desire. Because he has spent his force, he becomes desirous. He begins to compel others into his service and take their force to pursue his own designs. In this moment, you need evil. When you notice that your strength is coming to an end and desire sets in, you must withdraw it from what has been formed into your emptiness. Through this association with the emptiness, you will succeed in dissolving the formation in you. You will thus regain your freedom, in that you have saved your strength from oppressive association with the object. So long as you persist with the standpoint of the good, you cannot dissolve your formation, precisely because it is what is good. You cannot dissolve good with good. You can dissolve good only with evil. For your good also leads ultimately to death through its progressive binding of your force. By progressively binding your force, you are entirely unable to live without evil. Your shaping first produces an image of your formation within you. Thus, this image remains in you, and it is the first and unmediated expression of your shaping. It then produces precisely through this image an outer one, which can exist without you and outlive you. Your strength is not directly linked to your outer formation, but only through the image that remains in you. When you set about dissolving your formation with evil, you do not destroy the outer shape, or else you would be destroying your own work. But what you do destroy is the image that you have formed in yourself. For it is this image that clings to your force. You will need evil to dissolve your formation and to free yourself from the power of what has been, to the same extent which this image fetters your strength. Hence, your formation causes many good persons to bleed to death, because they cannot attend to evil in the same measure. The better one is, and the more attached one is to one's formation, the more one will lose one's force. But what happens when the good person has lost their force completely to their formation? Not only will they seek to force others into the service of their formation with unconscious cunning and power, but they will also become bad in their goodness without knowing it, since their longing for satisfaction and strengthening will make them more and more selfish. But because of this, the good ones will ultimately destroy their own work, and all those who they forced into the service of their own work will become their enemies, because they will have alienated them. But you will also secretly begin to hate whoever alienates you from yourself, because against your own wishes, even if this were in the best interest of things. Unfortunately, the good person who has bound his strength will all too easily find slaves for his service, since there are many that more than plenty who yearn for nothing more strongly than to be alienated from themselves under a good pretext. You suffer from evil because you love it secretly and are unaware of your love. You wish to escape your predicament, and you begin to hate evil. And once more, you are bound to evil through your hate, since whether you love or hate it, it makes no difference. You are bound to evil. Evil is to be accepted. What we want remains in our hands. What we do not want, what we do not want, and yet is stronger than us, sweeps us away. What we do not want, and yet is stronger than us, sweeps us away, and we cannot stop it without damaging ourselves, for our force remains in evil. Thus, we probably have to accept our evil without love and hate, recognizing that it exists and must have its share of in life. In doing so, we can deprive it of the power it has to overwhelm us. I'm going to stop there for the moment.
I think this goes back to the, is that objective? Is that subjective? People often, and he says here, it starts to disappear when it's too formed. That means that what happens is the heart always lives on. The heart is always in the form that's alive. But as you start to get too much formation, the heart continues regardless of the too much formation. And at that point, you're kind of left to try to know more about what happened. But the thing is, it can create an avarice of the intellect, a deadly sin of the greed of, I need to know more. And that just becomes more either or instead of a fullness alive of the both and. And it's interesting to me that here, the spiritual world is no less valuable than the outer physical world. Jung is, attributing the spiritual world, the soulful world, the inner world, the psyche world is a real thing, notwithstanding that I can't go tap, tap, tap and touch it on my table. It's the experiential experiential reality. And, just like with your coughing and that right there, this is occurring, and it's very real. And if we need to pause, but I think your example there is, it's very much, this is happening. And so I think that's a, people might not like it. You might not like it, but the thing is, it's occurring. And I think there's an honesty in what's happening that your cough here is a great metaphor for, well, I didn't plan that. You didn't plan that. But guess what, guys? This is what we have. So let's get in there. What is it? I some special, a Navy SEAL said, the plan never lasts past first contact. and I love that, because what happens then is the plan gets you in there and alive and started, and then you have to live your way through. And so I love the not knowing. You have to continue to live not sit on your laurels and, oh, look at what I've formed and all the certificates on my wall. Those are just dead, crunchy laurels, best swept back into the garden as compost, So
absolutely. Absolutely. And so what happened to me as I'm reading this is I think of current events, and I'm not going to be more explicit than that. But I'm just going to leave it at that for the time being. But we're all experiencing it in the collective, certainly in the United States and in many other countries. I mean, many countries have been taken over by power mongers.
Well, and the thing is, too, it's like a shell game. I mean, the last line, in doing so, we can deprive it of the power it has to overwhelm us. Instead of trying to choose, which shell is the little red ball under, you can back up a little bit and just watch them move the shells around. And then at one point, you'll probably see the little red ball get snuck out from under. You're still fascinated with trying to choose. And the reality is, no matter what you choose after a certain point, what you're looking for is already gone.
Right. So I want to go back here. There's one footnote that needs to be read, and then I'd like to have you finish up the chapter, Jordan. But I think I've probably read my limit at the moment.
There you go.
Footnote 137. In Psychological Types in 1921, Jung commented on the motif of the renewed God. The renewed God signifies a renewed attitude, that is, a renewed possibility for intensive life, a recovery of life, because psychologically, God always denotes the greatest value and thus the greatest sum of the libido, the greatest intensity of life, the optimum of psychological life's activity. So that's a really, really important footnote. And I'm going to read it again. The renewed God signifies a renewed attitude, that is, a renewed possibility for intensive life, a recovery of life, because psychologically, God always denotes the greatest value, thus the greatest sum of the libido, the greatest intensity of life, the optimum of psychological life's activity. And so...
And the optimum of life's psychological activity that's taking refuge and continuing the living.
Right. And so the point here is that I'm trying to emphasize is that whatever you call it, you don't have to call it God. It's not a question of a living being that's overseeing your life, but there's something that is your greatest intensity within you that causes you to do things. And you need to understand that, since time immemorial, human beings have called that God. And you can call it whatever you like, but as Jung once said, why not call it God? It's a perfectly good name.
Yeah, it's a perfectly good name. Yeah, exactly. Or Bill or Mary. But it's interesting too. I mean, the concept too, to take refuge that Michelle brought up, it just really has legs, because what happens is the refuge is indicating something outside or within you, or both, that you're resonating with, that in a sense, the surrender to is not handing yourself over, but steeping in, with, near, on, about, and what happens is then the refuge itself becomes a divine thing that is connecting you to more life force, not always just a big leaf to protect you. The refuge then becomes steeping in a larger identity or smaller. And I think then what happens again, that heartbeat pulsing through tight city streets, opening onto a plaza, you can live and live forward. The refuge is just the bindu at the top and bottom of each breath, or the breath, either way, depending on which one we're taking rest and relief from while the living continues.
Right.
I think to refuge too is also to settle. Shake the
Right.
snow globe and all the little white things flying around. But if you let it settle, you see a clear view of that little house in there.
Yep. So, Jordan, we're on page 312. Would you read through to the end of this chapter? I'm going to go get myself a cup of water and I'll be back.
When we have succeeded in making a God, and if through this creation our whole force has entered into this design, we are filled with an overwhelming desire to rise with the divine sun and become part of its magnificence. But we forget that we are then no more than hollow forms, since giving form to God has sapped us completely. We are not only poor, but have become sluggish matter throughout, which would never be entitled to share in divinity. Like a terrible suffering or an inescapable devilish persecution, the misery and neediness of our matter creeps up on us. The powerless matter begins to suckle and would like to swallow its shape back into itself again. But since we are always enamored of our own design, we believe that the God calls us to him, and we make desperate attempts to follow the God into the higher realm. Or we turn preachingly and demandingly to our fellow men to at any rate force others into following the God. Unfortunately, there are men who allow themselves to be persuaded into doing this to their and our detriment. Much undoing resides in this urge, since who could suspect that he who has made the God is himself condemned to hell? But this is the way it is, because the matter that is stripped of the divine radiance of force is empty and dark. If the God alights from the matter, we feel the emptiness of space as one part of endless empty space. Through haste and increased willing and action, we want to escape from emptiness and also from evil. But the right way is that we accept emptiness, destroy the image of the form within us, negate the God, and descend into the abyss and awfulness of matter. The God, as our work stands outside us and no longer needs our help. The God, as our work, stands outside us and no longer needs our help. He is created and remains left to his own devices. A created work that perishes again immediately once we turn away from it is not worth anything, even if it were a God. But where is the God after his creation and after his separation from me? If you build a house, you see it standing in the outer world. When you have created a God whom you cannot see with your own eyes, then he is in the spiritual world, and that is no less valuable than the outer physical world. He is there and does everything for you and others that you would expect from a God. Thus, your soul is your own self in the spiritual world. As the abode of the spirits, however, the spiritual world is also an outer world. Just as you are not alone in the visible world, but are surrounded by objects that belong to you and obey only you, you also have thoughts that belong to you and obey only you. But just as you are surrounded in the visible world by things and beings that neither belong to you nor obey you, you are also surrounded in the spiritual world by thoughts and beings of thought that neither obey you nor belong to you. Just as you engender or bear your physical children, And just as they grow up and separate themselves from you to live their own fate, you also produce or give birth to beings of thought which separate themselves from you and live their own lives. Just as we leave our children when we grow old and give our body back to the earth, I separate myself from my God, the Son, and sink into the emptiness of matter and obliterate the image of my child in me. This happens in that I accept the nature of matter and allow the force of my form to flow into emptiness. Just as I gave birth to the sick God through my engendering force, I henceforth animate the emptiness of matter from which the formation of evil grows. And then in italics, he continues, nature is playful and terrible. Some see the playful side and dally with it and let it sparkle. Others see the horror and cover their heads and are more dead than alive. The way does not lead between both, but embraces both. It is both cheerful play and horror. Love it. Yeah, you're muted still.
Okay, then there's a reference to several images, but before I show those images, I would like to hear what, if any, comments you have about this next part. This part that you just read.
I think the most, where's the one sentence that sticks out? A created work that perishes again immediately once we turn away from it is not worth anything. And I think that's important, because then what happens is if you create something that perishes immediately, that's basically checking something off on your grocery list. It's not creating something that's generative, that itself is going to create something, and that which the creation creates something. So I think there's a lineage living forward of the creation he's getting at. And I do laugh, though, here with the abyss and such. Like Nietzsche said, if you gaze long enough into the abyss will gaze back. But I always add, yes, but if you gaze long enough into the totality of the existential nothingness of the abyss, the whole of it will lean forward and say it's really rude to stare. So you have to keep moving. You can't just get stuck in staring in the abyss. Literally, it's not, come on, move along. Nothing to see here. So, but yeah. I think that a created work that perishes again immediately once we turn away from it is not worth anything, even if it were a god. So the generative versus the grocery list, I think, is really important there.
And we have a note here on YouTube. Thank you, Skip and Jordan. I'm so sorry to have to so sorry you have to deal with me, but I love your show. And
thank you.
You don't have to shut up. Blank Vision. I appreciate your gift here. There's a $10 gift certificate here.
Well, I appreciate the name Blank Vision. What a beautiful both and paradox.
Yeah.
Blank vision. And
Truly.
that's I love it, because it's not blind, it's blank. So there's a lot hidden in the deceptive simplicity of Blank Vision as a name. So I have to say, excellent job.
Yeah. And so anyway, I wanted to share these last images because they're kind of relevant to this. And we're going to get into hell next week. I'm not going to start hell as a chapter because it's a chapter. And geez, there's footnotes in this. Oh. And we're okay. There's going to be, after hell, there's going to be the sacrificial murder, and that is an intense chapter, which has footnotes that are pages long.
Well, it's funny because, hell next week, but it reminds me when I was a kid, it always tickled my dad to no end, but someone did something, I don't know what it was. I think I was 4 maybe, and somebody stirred me up. I was angry, and I mean intensely, not just tantrum. I was angry, and I was indignant, and I was stomping, and I was trying not to like say anything, but I was just like the volcano about to blow its capstone. And my dad's like, just say it, little man, say it. And what popped out of my mouth was, I looked up at whoever had said whatever they said, and I said, I'm gonna kill your hell. And I still wonder, what does that mean? But here, coming up on that next week, is I'm gonna kill your hell is kind of relevant to no, please don't. But it was one of those killing the generative piece. But I laugh out of the mouths of babes. I can kind of go round and around with that, but
sure. Okay, I'm going to show these images now. So here we were, and let's see if I can get this to. There we go. Okay, so our psyche is more like this, it seems to me. And this is on page 70, or in image 70 of the Red Book. And we have a container, that's the blue part, and the black, which is kind of an urn. And then we have this power within us. We can call it the self, we can call it the sun, we can call it God, whatever we like. And then out there in the world, there are all these various pieces that people have put together. There are the various shards of civilization. Okay, and
also this looks like a cross section of a budding rose, the vessel of a flower.
Yeah. And there's this, I want to come back to that, but then there's this vision of the similar thing, which is all the different systems we've put together that we live in, whether it be they nation states or computer systems or what have you, or the system that operates your television, what have you. And so you can think of it in this way. And then actually, I need to pull up one other image before I share this next one. So I'm going to stop that share and show you this image.
It's interesting. That one too looked a little bit like searchlights from a plane over a city, but there weren't planes yet.
Yeah. Okay. And so here's, that's interesting. So here, this image is one of the last ones in the Red Book, and it represents Dr. Jung's enlightenment. And I'm showing this for a very specific reason, because there's another image that goes with the part we've just been reading. And as you can see by the footnote in German, I think, German or Latin, maybe at the bottom, this was from the year 1917 that he did this image. And this image emerged from the famous Liverpool dream. in which Jung was in this dark city, and it was raining, and he was with several of his Swiss friends, and there were streets that were all leading to a central place, and one of the people said that there was a Swiss man who lived at an intersection of one of these streets, and this is Liverpool, the pool of life, and that's very important artistically. I'll explain that in a moment. But so this is what emerged from the so-called Liverpool dream. And at the center of the city is a pool and a kind of temple. And at the center of the pool or the temple was this magnolia, or a magnolia tree, I guess, and it was just bursting with light. And Jung recognized this as an image of the self, and so it really represented his own enlightenment overall. Okay, so
what I think
what
I think is interesting too is there's a real majesty in how he embraced that cascading, reflective water, light on water motion, that in a stopped image right here, you literally get a fool of the eye, or a trick of the vision to this thing looks active. You can just feel this thing bubbling up and emanating, and this is the life. And a magnolia, yes, and also that you see this light emerging from under the dark in the water, and there's just so much natural motion in that central portion that emanates out to create all these forms of Kens at the top and bottom, and eights and the eights and the eights, around it from the square. And it's so interesting here because just the way he embraced in the graphic, that thing is moving while it's still. So it reminds me of a wonderful photograph where it's a secretly active freeze frame.
Well, it's alive. It's a living image.
Yeah, it really is.
And you can't look at it the same way twice. But the reason I raised that was I wanted to show this next image that we were referring to here. And that's this one. Okay, and so you can see that, and Jung is still very German here, right? He's got streets that are very very well shaped, and it's all symmetrical and so on. But he and so you can see sort of the beginnings of the idea of this later image of the self and of infinity in this image. And so I want to read
before you do read. I think it's so prominently important with this. If you start over in the middle right, you see the head of a serpent that goes over, down, under, comes back up, and the tail wraps around the larger other body. And if you start at the top, the tail to the thick body, serpentine down, tail. So that's a serpent with two tails. There's no head. And then the other one that starts at the top, little tail wraps around that vertical at the very top middle, goes down. I don't know, is there a head hidden underneath the other two bodies? And so you get three distinct quote unquote serpents, but only one has a head that's evident, except is that a head, or does that then wrap around and go further down around and go over to the left and disappear? So there's a lot of beautiful ambiguity about is this possibly one serpent? No. Is it two serpents? Most likely. So there's this abstract caduceus, I think, going on in this piece.
Well, it's actually
that,
three serpents. So let me read the footnote. Okay, this might be the image. Tina Keller is referring to in the following statement in an interview where she recalled Jung's discussion of his relations with Emma Jung and Tony Wolfe. Quote, Jung once showed me a picture in the book he was painting, and he said, see these three snakes that are intertwined. This is how we three struggle with this problem. I can only say that it seemed to me very important that even as a passing phenomenon, here three people were accepting a destiny which was not gone into just for their personal satisfaction. And that was in an interview with Jean Lemesche at the University of Glasgow. So Tina Keller was one of Dr. Jung's closest followers early on, and throughout his life, she was married to a world famous theologian, and so she knew Jung for, I don't know, 40 or 50 years at least. And the point is that, first of all, when other people get into your life, you have to figure out how they interact. Okay. Now, and so the so-called menage a trois among Jung, Emma Jung, and Tony Wolfe is really a menage a trois of the psyches, which he was describing in this image.
Interesting too that none of the serpents have heads. They all have two tails. And so that moved to formation that he talks about, which is deadly, does not occur. So this is constantly in formation with two tails, that there is not a single serpent head. You have three serpents, each having two tails.
Well, I'm not sure about that. It depends on what you call a tail, because they're
well, the tail being the thin finishing. If I start at the bottom right and curve up and around to the top and go to, it ends up in another little thin tail. So there are no heads and eyes. So that move to formation that he talked about in this last chapter at the end is beautifully missing. So it was naturally always living rather than trying to become something.
Right. Now, the reason, let's see if I got it here. Yes. The reason I wanted to mention this is because I wanted to share with you my current Rocky. Okay. And so what we see in Jung here is a very German way of approaching these images, which is very precise, making sure that all the angles are right and all that such. And of course, he does have the serpents, but even the serpents are made by bunches of rectangles and things. And so, but here's the way we really are. And I'm not showing this for anybody to buy it, okay? This is just my Rocky practice that I've been following. And what this is you put down random color, first of all. You can I use watercolor, so I use a liquid watercolor from Saks. But you put down random color, and then you start to draw lines where the colors meet, where they meet in boundaries. And what you start to see, and this is sort of representative of our psyches, because our lives and our psyches are not as ordered as Jung's was. Okay, he was, first of all, he was a German, and very precise. And here, you know, there's actually four. I've given this four names in different directions. I'm sorry, I forgot to bring it in here, so I'm going to pull it up. But as you do this, you start to see things, start to see images. And what I often see are faces. And you may not see any faces in this at the moment. This may look totally random to you, but I think that we have a facility from primeval times to recognize beings in the general, in the jungle. And so first of all, I'm going to expand this so that you can start to see what I'm talking about, because I see it very clearly. And you can see all the eyes, like here's eyes looking down and looking to one side or another. And like here's the eye of a fish that's swimming down, and so on. So you start to see things, and you start to put things together. And you know, this is kind of what Jung is talking about in this segment. Is he's you know, he's talking about how things get put into groups. Like here you can see this eye is looking up, and here's an eye and a nose and a mouth and a chin here. Are you seeing my cursor?
Yes.
Okay. And so, I mean, here's a face. This guy has a certain expression. He's red. He's got a long nose here. And things start to emerge that you didn't see when you were looking at it before. And this is I'm actually going to interview Colleen Kibert tomorrow about the origins of this art form, because once you know that this is in here, and I presume everybody on YouTube can also see this in enough detail, and I'm nowhere near finished with this. But I want to read for you. Now I'm going to take it back to the original. And now when you look at this original, like here, I'm going to circle with my cursor. Here's a head lying on its back with an eye looking up and a nose there, and a mouth. Then you can see all these faces and beings in here. And this was done totally randomly. Okay, in other words, I simply put the paint down randomly, and then I started to draw in the color boundaries with a black. I'm using 3 sizes of black gel pen. So these darker lines, like here, these long lines are 0.7 millimeter gel pens, and then some of the darker lines that aren't so big are 0.5 millimeter gel pens, and the very tight places down in here. And if you look at these tight places, you'll see that even in them, there are many personages. Let me see if I can, well, yeah, come on. No, okay. I don't know why I can't. I know why, because I'm not working with, that isn't it. Anyway, even in these very tight places, you can see many faces. Now I'm going to leave it to you to chat about this for a minute, Jordan. I'm going to go get the 4 names that I put on this.
Okay. It's interesting too. It also looks like flying over a landscape. And I think it's interesting the repetition of the blue areas, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 of them, and the green, one green and the blue. I mean, you could just go on and on. What's interesting about this is, it's like seeing Einstein's hair, or Mary Cassatt's face in a tree. And I think what's interesting about that is, what do you see? And anything you see, well, you've seen. You don't have to prove it. The reasons are unreasonable. Just because you saw it means it's present. And so it's not about rationalizing. It's not about intellectualizing. This is about journeying through an image and tracking what you see, or what does it make you feel? So Blank Vision's title, what does it make you feel? So I think that whatever you see is real, whatever you feel here is real. And so the Rocky actually creates an ability to share a journey with someone else, but they have their own journey in the share instead of following yours. So I think it's a connective device, I think.
Well, it's a way into your own unconscious.
Yes.
In other words, I have no plans of selling these per se. I'm going to bring a portfolio of them with me to Confluence, and so I hope you'll come and see those. And we're going to do a collective Rocky at the Confluence, which is going to be very interesting. Because that's going to be like a snapshot of the collective unconscious. So what I've been doing with these, I consider them a way into my unconscious. It's a meditation technique. And, I have always had minor problems with getting committed to meditation one way or another, but this I really like because it forces me to focus on drawing these lines, and that is a way to open up my unconscious and for me to hear myself think. Now, just because I've highlighted different images here doesn't mean that that's what I was thinking about. Because when I was doing the meditation that was involved in doing this, and I'm still working on it. So this was begun on July 11th. July 11th at 8:55 a.m. I started it. And see if I have this the right way. Okay, so in this direction, I've called this the field of opposites. In other words, the whole world is filled with opposites, and each set of opposites has its own field in our psyche, and so it seems more like this than like the square streets of Liverpool, which Jung mentioned. And so if I turn it 90 degrees, okay, so there, okay, in this direction, make sure I've got the right direction here. I'm actually looking at the original here. Okay, so in this direction, it's called sad tears. And so I see tears falling here. And that's what came to my mind when I looked at it in this direction. And then in this direction, I've called this like father, like son. And this was actually the first name that I gave it, which is why it has a time on it. It's 8:55 on July the 11th. And what you see here is two profiles. There's a profile here of a strong nose and a mouth and a green eye. And above it is an even larger profile, which is perhaps the father here with the blue eye. And there are all also many examples of that throughout this, if you look at it in detail. And then there's one more. And this I called 2 days later, I called this mother's support when things get tough. And
I love that one because I immediately see this large lioness face with an orange eye and a blue eye and half of a blue nose with the line going down. There's this big cat, lioness, that's not menacing, just looking.
Okay, so the purpose of showing you that is to show you that, okay, Dr. Jung had a certain perspective of how his art would inform his audience. And what I'm trying to do here is to show you, you don't have to be as pedantic as Dr. Jung was in terms of your thinking or in terms of where all the boundaries are and all that sort of thing. And but this is by no means finished, by the way. I'm probably only halfway through drawing the boundaries that I want to draw into this. And the names that I came up with, I'm putting down the times when I came up with the names, depending on the orientation, because I'm keeping a list. So that, for example, here I have like father, like son, and then 10 minutes later, I changed the name to profiles. And so the names change as I explore my own unconscious. And the thing about these pieces of art as a piece of art is you can never look at this piece of art and see something that is dead. Okay, just as young as I'm sorry, you're not young, you are Jordan. Just as Jung talked about
Sometimes.
Yeah.
But you remind me with Iraqi about, you can't see something dead. At the same time, it reminds me of the old adage, I cannot swim the same river twice.
Surely.
Tomorrow I have changed and the river has moved on. But then I always add, but I'm still me and it's still the river I love. Right. So what's interesting is that change doesn't mean, tomorrow is, 24-hour renewable stuff. It's no, it's life continues. But when I swim the river, it's a whole new experience every time.
Right. So as Jordan did say, though, you can't look at this piece
right
the same way twice. Okay.
Right.
It's a living piece. And excellent art is like that. Excellent art is alive, and anything that's not alive is just graphics.
Well, and that moves between the living and not the dead, the living and the formation, and the living and the formation, and the living and the formation. And so instead of everything that's formed is dead, because we don't live in a sarcophagus, it's like what happens is the things around me aren't dead. They have a talismanic energy. Yeah. Otherwise, I wouldn't have them here. books I'm reading, objects I have on my desk. And what happens then is, I think, from the living to the forming, from the living to the forming, and both of them together all the time, always kind of creating, destroying life into being.
Yeah. So anyway, I'm not offering that. This piece is not even for sale, but, and, I don't sell much art. I have sold a little over the years, but the point is that using this method is a way, I'm convinced, of opening the door to the unconscious and letting you hear your own unconscious speak. And there are a couple of others that I've been working with over the last few weeks who've been working on Rockies as well. And they agree with me that once you sit down and start to draw these boundaries in, it becomes wholly absorbing. I mean, I've been doing it early in the morning, and if I sit down and start to draw in the boundaries, I'll forget to get up and get coffee for half an hour.
Right.
I'll just keep going at it. And
it's nice because it's a never-ending process that you can stop anytime.
Yeah, and Big Cat on YouTube says Jung thought the pots and pans were alive. Very much so.
Yeah. How else would they cook things?
Yeah. Yeah. And so anyway, I think that's enough for today.
Yeah.
Next week we're going to enter into hell.
So everybody get your wicker and your hand baskets. And why is it getting so hot in here?
And I made a note in words here at the top of my page, and it actually appears in the quote from in the quote down inside, and what I wrote on the top was, victory is with the one who can sacrifice. Victory is with the one who can sacrifice. And then if I look down into the passage, it's actually in italics. The evil one cannot make a sacrifice. He cannot sacrifice his I. Victory is with the one who can sacrifice. Wow.
And there's again that avarice I mentioned before, the greed of misering, that what instead of the sharing that can generate.
Yeah, that is a very powerful quote. Victory is with the one who can sacrifice.
Because you're giving.
Yeah, and so whatever. Anyway.
And with that.
Yeah. And with that, thank you everyone for following along with us. We've had a good audience on YouTube. And Anthony says, looking forward to hell. And
we'll go there in a handbasket.
Lots of thanks here. So anyway, it will be good. And Patrick Hollywood, good to see you. I'm going to, at the end of I want to put here on the YouTube chat, I'm first going to put, this is the link. If you want to join our panel, if you put your name into Sunday morning and click on the appropriate link in that link, then you'll receive the notices and you'll be able to join Jordan and me in discussion. You will, however, be on with us, and then I want to also repeat the Confluence the Confluence URL, because that's coming now, and we only have room for 50 people. So it's time to get on the bus if you plan to come. And we do have one person coming from London. And at the moment, we have one coming from Qatar, one coming from India, and a very interesting mural artist from Annapolis. It's
That was subtle.
Huh?
That was subtle.
Yeah, well, I'm gonna put his website here on the YouTube channel. It is cellspitfire .com, I believe. I hope that works as a link. Go to channel. That didn't work. What did I do? Let's try this again. HTTPS:// spitfire.com. I believe that's it. And that link should. Oh, I'm not in there, I guess. So when I push it, it doesn't mean anything. But let me just try one other thing here. I just want to make sure I've given you the right website. Yeah, it is .com, cellspitfire.com. And I urge you, when you get to this website, to scan through it, to enter it, and then to scan through it, and definitely look at the portfolio and look at that video there. This is an amazing artist that I happened to meet, fortunately, a few weeks ago, and he's really worth knowing about.
Nice.
So anyway, did you get that, Jordan? Or should I put it on the?
I took it down.
You took it down. Okay.
Yeah.
I mean, I'll give it to you here also.
Yeah, make sure. Yeah, that I'll check to make sure.
Okay, if you click through on that, you should be able to get it. Okay, so thank you everyone for being here, and we will see you next week. Take care now.